morning to Switzerland and welcome to our webinar series, Making Swiss Startup India Ready. I'm very happy to welcome Melanie Martinelli today.
Thank you.
Today's webinar will be on the topic Women Entrepreneurship, and the question, is it really that different in India? So let me just go through the agenda. Okay, so first, Melanie will introduce herself and she will speak a little bit about her experience of being a woman entrepreneur here in India. And afterwards, we will have 30 minutes for your questions. So please use the tool and type in all your questions you have. We're really happy to answer them. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. So also a very good morning to Switzerland from my side. Grüezi and bonjour. How do we start? So I was asked to kind of come here today and talk a little bit about whether being a woman entrepreneur here in India is really that different from being one in Switzerland. When I initially was asked about this question, my very spontaneous answer was just like, well, I don't know. I never was an entrepreneur in Switzerland. I've just been an entrepreneur here in India. So I thought what I kind of do is, so that you at the end can decide for yourself whether it is really that different or not, is just to kind of tell you a little bit more about what my journey was to becoming an entrepreneur here in India. What were some of the challenges that I faced or still am facing, even though it's been 7 years that I've been running the business here. And in hindsight, what do I think are some of the success factors as well in terms of being a woman entrepreneur here in India. So very briefly about myself, I'm originally from Basel and I moved to India in 2004 to do some research. And then in 2007, after a short stint in sales and marketing, got the opportunity or got inspired to start my own business in the learning and training field, HR development and so forth. So what were some of the challenges, if I look back on, some of them are actually still quite relevant today, is first of all, and I guess a lot of you might smile now because it doesn't come as a big surprise, is the famous word of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy and unwritten rules here in India. What do I mean by that? In the end of the day, it's not that it hampered our business, but starting a business here in India, yes, there is a lot of red tape across, especially also for a foreigner. While on the one hand, it's actually quite easy to register the business. Actually, I think a lot easier than in Switzerland. It took me 2 days to register it. The starting capital was very small, just 100,000 Indian rupees, which I think right now are probably about 1,300 Swiss francs. I think something around that. Exactly. So quite a straightforward process. But there's a lot of little unwritten rules when it comes to being a foreigner running a business here in India. Be it that it was quite a struggle finding a bank that would actually allow me to open a bank account as a foreigner. Be it also in terms of them wanting a lot of details about my father's background, because I wasn't married. So being an unmarried woman here in India and starting a business, I didn't really have a male sponsor. So they were like, well, at least can your dad maybe take on the financial guarantee? So luckily my relationship with my dad is very good, so that was fine. So those were some of the things. It's also in terms of bureaucracy that even though I've been living and working here for 11 years and running the business for almost 8 years, I still have to renew my visa on an annual basis. So I still don't have a permanent residentship. Every single year I have to go back to the foreign police, make a case for why my visa should be renewed. So of course that's a lot of paperwork. It's also a lot of stress because even though you're building a business here, and C2C today has 20 full-time employees and about 30 freelancers, so it's created quite a lot of jobs, and still you have to prove that you deserve it in that sense. So that's a little bit sometimes of a challenge. Unwritten rules to maybe not just about starting the business, but actually also running the business. What sometimes made it a little bit challenging, and I think that could be different to being an entrepreneur in Switzerland, is the entire salary infrastructure here. It's kind of like an unwritten rule and expectation by employees that every year the salary should actually go up, in average 10 to 15%. So when you start a business, well, 10-15% of salary increase every year, that's quite a lot, and you gotta budget for that. And initially I didn't really do that. So it created, of course, had a lot of impact on the business plan. So those are just a few examples, and I'm happy to explain a little bit more about them in case someone has questions, but I think those are a few things from a bureaucracy, unwritten rule perspective that could be a challenge. Now, of course, I think for me the most interesting aspect are actually the next two in terms of understanding the Indian way, but also the daily living aspects. In the end of the day, I am the foreigner here in India. I made the choice of coming here. I made the decision to start a business. So it was also my job to understand how things are being done. And again, sometimes that takes a while to find out. There are a lot of differences. And just to kind of name a few that for me really impacted the business as an entrepreneur was, for example, the difference of relationships being more important than actual contracts. From my understanding in Switzerland, most of the time when you do business, there's not just a handshake, you also sign a contract about the business you actually agree to do. Now in India, for very often in our business, in the training industry, we just shake hands. There's no written contract, so you also have to trust a lot. And in the beginning, that was quite a challenge because I never had the certainty, well, is this deal really sure? Is it fixed? Or might it actually just kind of go away? So of course, also in terms of managing an Indian workforce, I mean, even though we are two foreign directors, one of my colleagues is from France originally, and the other one that started the business with us is an Indian, and today we even have a fourth partner who's also an Indian. The majority of our workforce is Indian. They're all Indian, they're all from here. So there are, of course, a lot of different expectations, perception of you as a boss, how you interact with them, how you share feedback. And I do think there were probably sometimes situations where my employees looked at us thinking, what are they doing? This is not easy to work with, you know, a Swiss boss in that sense. So I think that can be a challenge if you don't take the time to really understand what drives your Indian workforce. You probably also it has a huge impact on people's productivity, their motivation level, and so forth. Another interesting one that just kind of comes to my mind, because I think again it's linked to the concept of being an entrepreneur, is when you start a business, the first few years are always quite crucial. Money is tight because you just invested it in the business, so you kind of hope that money comes in very fast. Now, what a key difference that I observed for us was, and even still today when I compare it with a lot of our clients across the globe, is that payment terms in India are slightly different. Cancellation policies are viewed as very different. So while you might agree on a 30-day payment term, most of the time we were only paid 90 to 120 days later. So you can imagine probably, you know, in the early days of being an entrepreneur, when you invest money in an office, in salaries and so forth, and you have to wait for the money to come in 120 days, that creates a challenge. Mm-hmm. Well, those are just a few examples, and of course there's loads more when it comes to cultural differences, but I'm sure maybe some of you again have some questions around it. So I'll just move to the last one as a challenge, which is about the daily living aspects. And I think that's probably for me the biggest difference of being an entrepreneur here in India, especially as a woman. In the end of the day, India is a very different country. The infrastructure is very different. You are the one that sticks out. And then I look at myself, my physical appearance, well, I can't really hide that I'm not Indian. So yes, I get noticed. So that took a while to get used to. It might sound very silly and not at all linked to entrepreneurship. But when you live in a country and you're constantly treated as a foreigner, sometimes in a positive way as well, it's not always that easy to fit in. And also, for example, daily living aspects of traffic. Probably a lot of you have heard about Bangalore traffic. Well, yeah, when you spend an average 2-3 hours in traffic every day, it has an impact on the kind of work hours you have. And especially in the early days of starting a business, well, you want to spend as much time as you can in the office and not just, you know, commuting from one meeting to another, which eats away a lot of your energy and passion that you actually need to start the business. It's also, though, in terms of daily living aspects, I think it's really about getting used to living in a country that's just so different. I mean, I come from a small place outside of Basel, and I live in a city with 10 million people today. Switzerland has 8 million. So getting used to the fact that you're constantly surrounded also by noise, a higher level of pollution, more traffic, as I said, but also in that sense, lesser infrastructure in that sense, can sometimes put a certain mental stress on you. And of course, that has an impact on how you manage the business. So those are just some of the well, in a nutshell, key challenges, I think, that spontaneously come to my mind. And as I said, I'll let it to you as an audience to kind of, decide whether is it now really that different to run a business here in India than back home in Switzerland. Linked to those key challenges are, for me, some of the success factors. And again, some of them are probably very similar to what a lot of you would come to a conclusion in terms of being an entrepreneur anywhere in this world. In the end of the day, what helped me a lot, especially in dealing with the first challenge of bureaucracy and unwritten rules, is having the right people network. Making sure that I have a good chartered accountant, a good contact at the foreign police, good contact at the embassy, just people who get things done for me, because everything takes longer because of bureaucracy, sometimes of not understanding the rules. So having local people you can trust in and out that do things for you, that helps a lot. Mm-hmm. Well, if you want to understand the Indian way, in the end of the day, it has to start with you. So it all comes down to a certain amount of cross-cultural competence, which for me is not just the knowledge about the other culture, but it's about having the sensitivity, the positive attitude of looking at the way your Indian workforce does things and say, well, it might be different from the way I do it, but I'm sure it works as well. So let's give it a chance. Because in the end of the day, you decided, or I decided to start a business here. I didn't start the business here to change the people here, but it's because I saw an opportunity here, great talent, highly motivated people. So how can I best work with them? And I think then in the end of the day, for me, the key thing, and I don't know how many entrepreneurs are listening to that and whether they would agree to it, but I think in the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, it all comes down to passion and a positive attitude. Being an entrepreneur, not just as a woman, not just here in India, but maybe just more as a foreigner, is a roller coaster. There's ups and downs, there are moments where everything goes fine, and then there are moments where it just all goes kind of, upside down. And keeping that positive mindset and keeping the passion to every day, put again your best into it, and especially here in India where the environment changes very fast, deal with those changes in an open mind, see them as an opportunity, and not as something that makes your business, slow down or creates a challenge. I think that's probably one of the key things. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Yes, thank you very much for this great introduction. So let's start the Q&A session. Once again, I would like to remember you, please just type all the questions you have into the GoToWebinar tool, and we're really happy to take them. So my first question would be, what motivated you to take up the entrepreneurial path here in India?
Well, it's a good question, and I think sometimes, funnily, my parents still ask me that question as well, because as I just mentioned, when I moved to India, it was just at the end of my studies in 2004, and I was supposed to come here just for 4 months research for my final thesis. I was supposed to come here for 4 months, do research, go back. Doing my research, I got an offer to work as a head of sales and marketing for a local IT company, taking care of the European market in outsourcing. And I somehow always had this spirit of you don't say no to opportunities, just take them on if they present themselves. So I told myself, okay, I'll do that for 2 years and let's see where it takes me. Now, after 2 years, I met a few people, which today are my business partners, and at a conference, we kind of started talking. Wouldn't it be great to have a business together? Don't you see all these opportunities here in India with regard to training and education? And since I was working in an Indian IT company where we did a lot of work with Europe, especially with the European market, but also others, I did see that there was a huge need for training and development in the Indian workforce. Universities produce a lot of graduates every year, but a lot of them, from a soft skill perspective, are not skilled or trained enough to really enter the workforce. So the opportunity was quite big, and I kind of thought there was nothing to lose. So it's not something that was on my mind forever. It's really the opportunity presented itself. I said, okay, let's try it. In the worst case, I'm losing 100,000 Indian rupees, about, $1,300. But I'm surely richer in experience, and I'll go back. Well, 11 years later, I'm still here. So I guess something happened, and somehow it took off. But it's actually a little bit more of an accident in that sense. It wasn't planned. It just happened. But it happened for the right reason, I guess.
So do you think it's easier now for a woman to run a business here in India, or in urban India especially, than in Switzerland?
I'm not sure. It's a hard question because I never thought about running a business in Switzerland. And I also have to be very honest that I actually never really worked in Switzerland. I moved to India right after my studies. So all the work experience I had in Switzerland was through internships during my studies. However, what I did feel that was very easy here in India, and I think that's what motivated me to do it, is that India is a country where entrepreneurship is lived a lot, even be it small businesses. There's so many people working as entrepreneurs, be it that they run their chai business, be it that they run their taxi business, family business, whatever it is. So it does feel very inspiring to start a business in a country where there's a lot of entrepreneurs around you, because people say, let's just go for it. I felt, for example, when I shared my idea of starting the business with people in Switzerland, my family and friends, even though I don't blame them for anything, is the reactions were a little bit like, what do you mean starting a business in India? Isn't that too risky? It was almost kind of like, they looked at it, the famous thing about the glass is half empty. Whereas here in India, the glass is always full, it seems, just try it out. So yeah, there are the challenges we talked about of doing a business in India, running a business. But I think the environment is extremely conducive, A, from the perspective of people around you embracing entrepreneurship, and B, in my area, just huge opportunity. I mean, I work in the corporate training field, and the economy is still growing at quite a good rate, maybe not as well anymore as 10 years ago, but it's still high growth, which means companies are hiring, so there's a need for training. So that made it, I think, as a package, quite easy for me to start the business. Now again, does that mean it's easier in Switzerland or here? I'm not sure. And coming to the woman perspective, that is an interesting one to reflect on, because in the end of the day, it is, I guess, in both countries, Switzerland and India, one thing that we have in common is you still do see slightly more men in the senior positions. So I think as a young woman entrepreneur starting it, that might not be the most usual. And yes, sometimes when I met people here, the reaction was like, what? You run a business, but you're way too young. I mean, I was barely 26 when I started the business. You're too young to run a business, and you're a foreign woman and so forth. So there was a little bit of an initial skepticism, but then when you prove people that you're competent, you actually climb up very quickly in their perception. So again, yes, there might be a little bit of a look at you, wow, okay, that's surprising, but I never felt that someone put stones in front of me to make it difficult for me. So yeah, so can't give a yes or no answer to it, but I would say for me personally, I felt it was easier here because it was less risky. Also, when you start a business, I was young, I didn't have many savings. Cost of living in India wasn't that high and still isn't. So I wasn't dependent on the business making a lot of money very quickly. I had more time, I felt. And that kind of, I guess, also reduced a little bit of the pressure of making the business work.
Thank you. Yes. So for my next question, I also prepared some keywords.
Okay.
You mentioned that there are cultural differences for sure. So my first keyword would be male boss. What comes up into your mind about male boss?
Male boss, male boss. Well, I think if I would have to put it into a question, I get that quite a lot, is people asking me, is it easier to be a woman boss or a male boss? It probably must be easier to be a male boss. Now, we are 4 business partners, 3 guys, 1 girl. And I guess we would have to ask my employees in terms of what they think. Is it easier to have the male boss or the female boss? The only thing that I can say is that I think a lot of people, as I mentioned before, are surprised to see me at my age and being a foreign woman, being the boss of a company. So I'll give you just a little anecdote, that happens sometimes when we go to networking dinner. If the 4 directors go together to a networking dinner, very often people think, well, either I must be the wife of one of them, because we do have 1 foreign director, so I could be the wife, or maybe I'm just a junior person accompanying, the more senior staff. So is that now a disadvantage? Sometimes I actually think it's also an advantage, because in the end of the day, people don't have high expectations when they meet me, I guess. They just think I'm one of the more junior people. And when they then find out that I am one of the directors, one of the owners of the business, there's a lot of positive surprise. So in the end of the day, it kind of works to my favor very often as well. On the other hand, yes, I do feel sometimes from a cultural difference perspective that when I share feedback with certain team members, yes, they accept it. Yes, they take it in. Yes, they say, yes, madam, we've understood. Do they really change something? Not always. Now, when I send Vinay or Sanjay in, whom are two of my Indian business partners, well, action is taking a little bit faster. So I guess there could be a little bit of a connection between it. Yeah.
So I have here another question from one of our registrants.
Okay.
It's, if you were to begin a startup again in India, how differently would you go about it?
How differently would I go about it? I don't know. I'm super happy the way it went. I'm very honest. I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure I made things in the beginning that weren't right. I probably even stepped on certain people's feet, be it in the banks, at the FRO, at the company registrar and everywhere. But I think sometimes the fact that I didn't know how to do it, because there wasn't anyone I could reach out to. There weren't many young Swiss female entrepreneurs at that time. Probably also made me just more daring. I just did it. And yes, I made mistakes maybe and I learned from them. But I think I would actually pretty much do it the same way, because when I look at the business today, we are 20 full-time employees, 30 freelancers. We opened an office 2 years ago in China that's taking off. We have a small office in Singapore, another small one in the US. I'm actually proud, I kind of look back and say, I never thought that this journey will take me here. And especially when I look at what we've done for some of the employees, how engaged they feel with us, how proud they are to working with us. When I look at my 4 business partners, which are, we have our little fights, but they just rock, and they really make it happen. We respect each other a lot for the different strengths that we bring to the business. So, thinking that I would do something different would almost mean to me that I'm not happy with what I have today. So from that perspective, I would just actually do it the same way. Maybe, given the fact that today there's a lot more information available, be it, through you guys as well, maybe I would reach out a little bit more and kind of familiarize myself with it. But in the end of the day, it was just also a good learning journey like this. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So when reading about women entrepreneurs, one of the words which mostly comes up is the word of kids and family. What can you say about that topic?
Well, first of all, what I can say is I don't have kids. So of course now the critics will come, oh yeah, that confirms the stereotype. Women entrepreneur, she's in her mid-30s and no kids. So yeah, she put her career first. And it's true, yeah, to a certain extent. However, it wasn't planned like that. My life also took a very different road than I initially planned, from a relationship perspective and other stories. But actually, when I look at it today, and when I look at my situation, and I look at friends that have a 9-to-5 job, a full-time job in a corporate, be it in Switzerland or here, it's not always easy to manage your daycare for the kids and so forth. Now, when I look at the way I build up my business, I think unconsciously and sometimes consciously, the way we build it was always in keeping in mind that at one point I will have kids. And that moment is now approaching. I mean, it is a big topic for me and my partner, who is from here, that, yeah, next year we would like to, in the next 1-2 years start a family. And I actually do think that being an entrepreneur makes it almost easier, because in the end of the day, I'm my own boss. So it's up to me to decide how much I want to work. Of course, with all the financial implications that might have. But I also think, because we've always talked about that with the business partners, the foundation is there to make that happy. So yes, of course, in the early days, when I started the business, I worked 500%, weekends, evenings. There just wasn't a limit to, to your hours. And it was always about doing what the customer wanted. So if the customer wanted you to leave on a Sunday night to do a training in Singapore the next day, you would do it because it's money, it's revenue to pay for the business, to pay the salaries. But I think now that the business has matured, I actually see it as quite a big opportunity as well. And I actually look forward to that next phase as well, because I think I build up something together with my business partners that's strong enough today to allow me to enjoy the family and the kids once they're here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So one other question we have is, how difficult is funding for Swiss women entrepreneurs in India?
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one, or a difficult one actually, whoever posed it. And I gotta be very honest that I'm probably not the perfect expert on it, because the way we built our company was out of our own pocket. We've never taken any money from anywhere, be it bank loans, be it investors, and so forth. The entire business of C2C is built on our own profit. So we always kept money aside, kind of paid ourselves lower salaries to finance our growth, be it the expansion into China, Singapore, the US, or other markets in India. Everything was always financed naturally through the organic growth of the company. The one thing I do know in general in terms of investments in India, the traditional concept, for example, of taking a bank loan to start a business doesn't really exist. And especially for a foreign person, it's very difficult to do. There are some loopholes for Indian entrepreneurs to do that, but especially as a foreigner, it's almost impossible to get a loan from a bank, which in Switzerland is quite a common way of actually funding or getting money. However, I do think in different niches, there are opportunities for entrepreneurs, be it women or men, to seek the help of the Indian government, for example, joint investments and so forth. But I wouldn't know about any agencies per se, or the names. It's just things that I've heard, that especially in areas where the Indian government has a very high interest to make things happen, that there are ways of collaborating. The other thing that I know, because we started a second business 3 years ago, a little bit more of a corporate social responsibility aspect in the field of vocational training, where we are trying to offer kids from the more rural areas and the slums, kids which could not finish their education. We are offering them vocational training, like a shorter version of the Swiss apprenticeship concept in growing industries in India, for example, hospitality and retail. And what we did there, because we couldn't entirely fund it out of our own growth, we partnered up with different NGOs to make it happen. Plus, we also got in contact with big corporates that might have a shared interest in investing in it. So, for example, in retail or hospitality, we reached out to big retail companies, big hotel chains, to see whether they would be interested in financing some of the seats of the students. So, sorry if I don't have an absolutely clear answer to it. I'm sure there must be ways. And again, I don't think it would be any different for a woman than a man in that sense. In the end of the day, you have a good idea, you believe in it, there's an opportunity, I think you probably will find someone to invest or help make it happen. Mm-hmm. But then in the end of the day, it's also a fact that, as I said, starting a business in India doesn't, especially in the service industry, doesn't actually require that much seed capital. Mm-hmm. You just need $1,300 or Swiss francs to register it, and the rest is the running cost. Mm-hmm. In my case, that's what it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. So we just have one question coming up. Someone is asking, by nature, women are more emotional and nurturing, which sometimes can be a hindrance to running a business. What are your thoughts about it?
That's a nice question. I wish my dad could listen to that one. And the reason why I'm saying that, I agree, I guess, there's a lot of research and so forth that says, yeah, women are more emotional and more nurturing. The thing is, I was raised by my dad, so I had a slightly different upbringing, I would say. My mom was working, dad was at home. So a lot of people also keep telling me that there's a lot more masculine aspects in the way that I do things. I can be very tough And that sometimes they almost feel like, where is that female side that the person asking the question is actually coming from? So if I look at the 4 business partners, I would actually almost dare to say that I am not the most emotional and nurturing of the 4 of us, but I can be really the one that's quite, to the point, rather cold in taking business decisions if I think something doesn't make sense. Now, yes, on the other hand, when it involves decisions for the staff, when I feel that people are impacted or their families get impacted, I do sometimes sense that, well, yeah, the heart, starts beating a little bit more, and I kind of feel guilty having to take sometimes very hardcore business decisions. But I think, yeah, having been raised by my dad and with 2 brothers together, I probably have quite a healthy balance between the emotional female sides and the slightly more, if we can call it like that, colder business side that in that case would be associated with man. But I think it can be, especially here in India though, if I want to build on the question, I think it can be a strength because India as a whole, I would say, is a more emotional culture as well. So relationships are very important. So being able to create intimacy and relationships with the people you do business with or even your employees is a great asset. So for example, even in our work, we try and spend a lot of time with our employees, be it over lunch, be it in one-on-one meetings, over tea. And even if I kind of compare how I interact with customers overseas in comparison to here in India, there's a lot more social interactions with a lot of my Indian clients as well, where sometimes you just meet without even actually talking about business, but you just meet to catch up. You update each other about what's happening in life, and you just kind of build that more intimate rapport. So I guess actually, if I reflect on it, maybe from that side, bringing that female emotional nurturing side can actually be quite a big asset. Mm-hmm. And actually also if you think about the challenge that a lot of people refer to in terms of attrition, there's always a lot of talk in the Indian industry everywhere about attrition, employees, jumping from one job to another, which can, by the way, also be one of the key challenges, and that's why it's so important to have the right people network. And again, one way to probably also make sure that your employees stay longer and don't feel that need to just jump from one job to another is probably to invest again in that personal relationship. I think you can, especially with some of your key people, if you nurture that, I think it actually has quite a lot of advantages. So it might come in quite handy if I think about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. So we just have another question. Someone is asking, as a Swiss woman, what is your opinion of support ecosystem for women entrepreneurs in India? We always hear Bangalore as a destination, but is the entire country equally evolved for women entrepreneurs?
It's interesting. So again, I have to be very honest that I didn't use a lot of support to kind of build my business when I moved here. I didn't know about a lot of support systems. I came here 11 years ago where the number of expats also in India, especially at my age, was a lot lower than what you have today. And still it was possible to happen. Now, I do think that, especially in the bigger metros, if you look at Hyderabad, at Pune, Mumbai, of course, Delhi, Calcutta, but also Chennai, there are a lot of things happening as well. There are a lot of different industry chambers. There are loads of networks through universities, through the big corporates, because they're all present there as well. So that creates a certain ecosystem that can be very supportive of anyone who wants to start a business. Now, for me, the more interesting question, and I think, anyone who is from Bangalore, especially anyone, if it's any Indian people are listening in as well, would probably agree that once you come to Bangalore, you don't want to leave anymore. Bangalore has a lot of advantages, and it's not just about the support in terms of the business. There's the softer factors that, for me, make Bangalore an extremely interesting city. It's the weather. I know it sounds really stupid, but the weather, right now in other parts of India, it's like almost 50 degrees. Well, we are sweating quite a bit here in Bangalore as well, but it's still a lot healthier. It has a very healthy mix between traditional Indian aspects and the more developed aspects. So there's a very healthy mix, I find, in Bangalore that can stimulate you a lot and also make some of the daily living aspects as a woman a lot easier. So just, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people also read about it, Delhi, for example, you know, the more northern places in India, it is also known to be a little bit, well, if you can use the word safe, yeah, it is less safe per se, usually when you say, than compared to Bangalore. I never feel afraid of taking an auto or a taxi by myself here in Bangalore, no matter what time it is. Whereas in Delhi, I wouldn't really do that. I'd be a little bit more careful. So it's not just the support infrastructure, but it's also more the daily living aspects that for me make Bangalore an extremely interesting place. Afterwards, I think we have to be fair to the other parts of India as well and look at it from a perspective of what's the business you want to invest in. I landed in Bangalore because I was working in IT or doing research in IT. And yes, Bangalore was kind of the IT hub, but Hyderabad today, loads of IT happening as well. Whereas if you go, for example, you know, more to Mumbai, there's a lot more happening in the financial kind of, you know, industry. You go to kind of Goa, Mumbai area, there's a lot more pharmaceutical investment happening. In Delhi, I think there's a lot of service industry, but it's also much more connected to anything that has to do with government, NGOs, but also production. So again, it depends. You want to invest in textile, well, a lot of companies are further south, you know, I mean, if you look at Tirupur or other places in the southern part of India, they are very investor friendly for the textile industry. So I think it also depends in which industry you want to invest in. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, yeah, for me, from a daily living perspective, I've just become Bangalorean in that sense. I've just become too used to living in Bangalore, which is quite green, has good climate, and also loads of places close by that make it easy to strike a nice work-life balance as well. You get out on the weekend, you visit some places, coffee plantations or anything, which also allows you to recharge your batteries in that sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as an entrepreneur, probably the word work-life balance is always something very important. You mentioned the long working hours, yeah, especially at the beginning. Then is it more difficult in India to get a good work-life balance, for example, regarding the traffic or the hours in traffic, yeah, you spend, or how do you see it? It's again one of these colorful questions where I think you have different shades of how you can answer it. If I look at work-life balance purely from the entrepreneur side, I would say, and I don't think India makes a difference here, the first few years, work-life balance, wasn't really there. And I even had a relationship also going for a toss for that. And I think there was very little time for friends, for family, for anything, because you just worked. I just wanted to make this happen. I just wanted this company to grow. And I wanted to kind of, you know, implement that vision. We had that idea of becoming the first, you know, globally recognized Indian soft skill training company in that sense. I mean, now it's an L&D company, but at that time, we really wanted to show that you can create something very powerful out of India. Because when we started the business, most trainings were bought from outside. There was very little offered in India. So we really kind of wanted to bring upon a change in that. So yes, we just put all sweat and everything we had into it. So work-life balance, not there. However, if I compare it today, having grown in the business has matured, and if I compare it to being an employee, for example, I actually think today I get more work-life balance because I get flexibility. So yes, certain days I work a lot, and certain months I travel a lot across different time zones, which can be very, very tiring and so forth, but also exciting. As an employee, I had to be at work, and especially in an Indian environment, I realized the work hours were quite long. So even if you might have been done with your job, it was not really accepted in the early days when I worked here that you would just leave at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, the regular workday ended at 5, 6. You wouldn't leave before your boss leaves or colleagues leave. So that kind of added a lot of extra hours to your, you know, work schedule, which is kind of different today as an entrepreneur. However, you mentioned about the traffic and so forth. So what's a little bit difficult is that there's a lot of time that you lose in not just the business area, it's the commute. It's that you're trying to fix things because sometimes the infrastructure is not there. Like just the other week, we've had huge internet issues at office. So internet was very slow, we couldn't get extra bandwidth, it was down, so everything takes longer. Now, if that happens, what happens to your work-life balance? Well, you stay in office longer, you're not gonna have the time to go play squash or something in the evening. The other thing that I realized as a foreigner compared to Switzerland, what might be different from a work-life balance, is what you do. In Switzerland, my work-life balance came a lot from just going to the mountains, taking my cycle, getting out into the forest. Well, you live in a 10 million people city, so you're not going to get the same greenery, you're not going to get the same fresh air, which for me had a lot to do with work-life balance. So I kind of had to completely change my perspective as well to say, well, yeah, I might not get the mountain bike, I might not get the snowboard, the mountains and all of that. I might not get, a walk around the Rhine River, but what do I get? And I kind of just changed and adapted my hobbies. So like a lot of people in India, and it's not just because of the Yoga World Day on last Sunday, I started doing yoga, which gives me quite a good work-life balance. I play squash, things that I can do indoor. And yeah, so you just kind of had to adapt because it's a difference whether you live in a 10 million people city or in a small village with a few thousand people. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's another question coming up. Someone is asking regarding the bureaucratic challenges in India. Culturally, is it advantage to be a woman when you deal with senior professionals such as the federal authorities in India?
I hope no one is listening to this really, because depending on what I could get interpreted kind of wrongly. Let me put it like this. Yes, you can play with the fact of being a woman, and you can especially play also with the fact of being a young woman that looks different. What I mean by that is when I compare of how some of my male foreign colleagues struggle with getting their visa renewed. Well, I've learned a few words, Kannada, the local language. I walk into, the foreign police. I give them a nice smile. I talk to them a little bit in the local language. And yes, it kind of breaks the ice. It makes things happen. So sometimes, yes. I sometimes call this anywhere you live as a foreigner, and it's not just India. You're always confronted with a certain, you're the outsider. So that can result sometimes in negative discrimination, or, if you want to call it like that, also positive aspects. So sometimes you get preferential treatment, especially in some of the things linked to bureaucracy. If I look, for example, even at the bank, sometimes I walk in. Just the other day I had to go in because I needed a bank statement for the last 6 months to apply for my China visa. And I walked in, there was a huge queue. I walked in, I smiled at one of the guys, and he came directly to me, and I was treated much faster than others. So yes, I guess sometimes being not just a woman, I would say a woman that adds a smile to her face can sometimes help in accelerating the speed of certain things with the ministries, with the banks, with any authorities that you have. Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. I would say.
So time is running really fast. We're almost at the end. I just want to conclude with the last question. Mm-hmm. So for Swiss women entrepreneurs, what concrete advice can you give if someone wants to set up a business in India?
Okay, well, that's a good one. So kind of like one conclusive statement in that sense. Well, in the end of the day, and it's kind of linked to what we said as the title for this discussion, is being an entrepreneur, a women entrepreneur here in India, really so different than being in Switzerland. For me, it's a yes and a no, as you probably have seen through the different answers I gave to all the questions. So hence, my key advice really is, don't come to India only because you think there's an opportunity. Come to India because you actually want to come here as well. What I mean by that is, I think India can sometimes ask a lot of you. Sometimes it can be quite tiring living in such a different environment. And the opportunity alone and the money you make with that, for me, as a person, doesn't compensate for that. I think in the end of the day, what makes India a great place to invest in, to start a business, is if you like it here, if you actually see the beauty of this country as well, and not just the chaos that might be there as well. So I think the advice is really about try to embrace it at all levels. Don't try to change India into something you would like it to be, but leverage what India has to offer. Yes, India is not the same by no means than Switzerland, and yes, a lot of things might take longer and they might seem more complicated, but that's a choice to come here and run a business. And if you want to make it work, it's about really going deeper into understanding how it works, giving something for yourself into it as well. I mean, adding your spices, I think, I think I brought a lot of Swissness to my business, but I think it's about really working what's around you and not trying to change it. Work with it, not against it. I think that in a nutshell is kind of the key advice, because in the end of the day, if you start a business, comes back to the success factor of having positive attitude and having the passion, and then just make it happen. And because the environment is here, there's so much growth, there's a lot of motivated people, a lot of talented people. So I think if you kind of treat people here with a lot of respect, there's a lot that you get back. But if you start fighting the system and you try and do it the Swiss way in that sense, I think that's when a lot of the frictions happen. And that's where probably actually also in the end of the day, you're losing a lot of the possible synergies and opportunities that you could have gotten by actually just kind of going with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that these are great closing words. So thank you very much, Melanie, for coming to our webinar and for your really valuable insights. And thank you everybody for participating in this webinar and for your really good and interesting questions. You can also watch this webinar again on our YouTube channel and on our website. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to contact us anytime under innovation@swissnextindia.org. I wish you a good rest of the day and thank you very much.